Welcome back, everyone, to part 14 of Ancient Mesopotamia, Portrait of a Dead Civilization. We are finishing up our section on the brief history of Mesopotamia and looking today at the history of Assyria. We're going to look at the early period, Assyria's three fronts that they faced over and over again, and then finally a brief look at the NEO-ASSYRIAN period. So Oppenheim breaks up the Assyrian Empire into essentially three sections: before the Dark Age itself, which of course we don't have any information for, and then after the Dark Age. So the early period is, we first have good information from the Old Assyrian period, and of course this is that time when there was trade between Anatolia and Ashur, the trade of tin and textiles, the merchants, where we have letters and contracts, and it's an amazing period, which you have great documentation, and we have a daily data that you can watch to see a little bit more about this period. Following this, we have the time of Shamshi-Adad I, approximately 1813 to 1781 BCE. We've described his reign in previous videos, but he ruled Upper Mesopotamia from the city of Shubat-Enlil, and of course, lots of interesting things about him and his rule and his two sons. But the big thing to remember here in this brief essay is that after his death, as with many kings, his kingdom quickly fell apart. And of course, this is the time in which Hammurabi secures his kingdom there in Babylonia. The Hittites come and conquer the kingdom of Mitanni in northern Mesopotamia and Assyria region in the 14th century, and this allows Assyria to begin to reassert some control and independence. And it is at this time, following this conquest of Mitanni, that Assyria joins what we know as the Great Powers Club during the period of the Amarna Archives. So, following the Dark Age, we have Oppenheim describes three fronts that the Neo-Assyrian Empire constantly faces. They are, first, the mountain regions and the people that inhabit them. And so there's constant either battling against or guarding against these people groups from the mountains. And this results in colonization in this, what would be considered a buffer zone or a buffer region in between Assyria and the mountains themselves that acts as a barrier between Assyria and the mountain groups. There is, of course, the struggle with Babylonian South. So the problems that we looked at 2 days ago in the last video, where there are repeated attempts by the Assyrian kings to try to quell revolts and skirmishes and problems in the south, which ultimately leads to their demise. And then finally against the west, heading toward the Mediterranean, and you see relentless campaigning to the west. This is one of the hallmarks. It gets to the point where Assyrian kings are campaigning every year, and this often happens to the west. So the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and again, this is going to be broad strokes, very brief. That's what it's meant to be. We will get into greater detail in later videos, but this will be sufficient for now. We do have another slightly more detailed Mesopotamian history video on our channel if you'd like to take a look at that. But here, there are several early first millennium kings, Assyrian kings, that push south and west. and Tukulti-Ninurta I, Shrinivasarpal II. But a big expansion comes under Tiglath-Pileser III. He expands, he reorganizes, and this is really a high point in the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Sargon II spends the majority of his time reconquering areas that were taken by Tiglath-Pileser III and then lost. His son Sennacherib comes to the throne and has to deal with the Babylonian problem, which we've described in the other video. And Sennacherib's sons Ashurbanipal and Shamash-shum-ukin. Ashurbanipal is placed over Assyria, and Shamash-shum-ukin is over Babylonia as a way to try to establish some peace and some stability in both regions. Of course, Shamash-shum-ukin is turned to the dark side and rebels against Ashurbanipal, and there's a civil war that takes 4 years to finally bring an end to. This, of course, puts Assyria in an extraordinarily bad place financially and militarily, and this creates a scenario where Assyria falls by 612 to the Babylonians under Nabopolassar and the Medes. So in summation, there are 3 periods that Oppenheim identifies before, during, and after the Dark Age. The later period saw greater military aggressiveness and expansion. There were 3 fronts that the Assyrians fought on the mountains, Babylonia, and to the west. The Neo-Assyrian period saw expansion, but the south could not be effectively controlled, and this lack of control resulted in its eventual downfall to the Babylonians and the Medes. So that's Assyria in a nutshell. And so now we've looked at, in some detail, Babylonian history, now Assyrian history, and in the upcoming videos, we're going to be following Oppenheim's survey of Mesopotamian religion. So this should be fun. So stay with us. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?